it, and now I'm doing it again. So I know what I'm going to say, so let's do our praise. There is no God like Jehovah. 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 There is no Messiah like Yeshua. 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 Okay. Before I start, I'd like you ask you to pray for my wife Rivka. She has a sinus infection with a little bit of nose bleeding, so please pray for her to get healed from the sinus infection and nosebleeds. And you might want to pray I don't catch it as well. Okay, so when America was at the so-called America Great era in modern days, it was in the 50s, which I grew up in. And I want to tell you right now, it wasn't so great for the Puerto Ricans that moved to New York. They were heavily discriminated against. And it wasn't so great for the people of color in general, the blacks. And they were generally discriminated against very badly. They had not much opportunity for much to happen. Okay, so moving along, in World War II, the entertainment for people was the newspaper, the radio, and magazines. When I was a kid, we used to get Life magazine. It had a lot of big pictures in there. It was really interesting. I think it came out weekly. We used to get it mailed to us. It was interesting. And we had a newspaper delivered, the New York Post, every day. I grew up in a Jewish ghetto in the Bronx, so we had the newspaper delivered every afternoon, and it was a junky newspaper. And then when I got older, and I went to my first 2 years of college in New York, I used to go down to Manhattan on the subway, and I used to think I was a big shot, and I'd read the New York Times, the Herald Tribune, and I think that was really cool, you know. And I used to believe that I had a little bit of a network issue, and the house has different networks, and I put it on a different one, so it should resolve it. So during World War II, the primary means that people were got news, let's say, was the newspaper and the radio. Now, you couldn't go open your own radio show. You had to get a license, and it would cost a lot of money, and you wouldn't get it. It's just not happening. Okay. Only the elite were running the radio stations, and that's what the people relied on for news, opinions as to what's going to happen. And they would have one elite debate another elite, and it was all controlled. And they were manipulating you with the newspapers. And but people were still living their lives. They were not in a virtual world. They were in reality. They worked, they came home, maybe they listened to the radio in the evening, they read the paper, they ate supper, they listened to the radio in the car, but they were in the real world. People had friends, associates, they interacted with their children, with their neighbors, with their relatives, with other people. They didn't just operate online. They had a real life. That's gone. But let's trace it. So around the 53 era, they had television in the 40s, but nobody owned them, and the screens were this big. They put magnifying glasses in front of them, all those silly things. They were tinny. There was nothing to watch. There was barely any TV at all, if any, in most of the nation of America. There was nothing to watch. So by about 53, shows started to emerge. You had Burns and Allen, you had Jack Burns show, whatever they call it. You had some variety shows, news TV, ball games were maybe just starting to come on. By about 54, 55, there was a pretty good assortment of TV in the bigger cities. The little cities, had one or two stations, maybe three. In New York, we had 2, 4, 5, 7, 9, 11, 6 stations, and 13 was a junk station, and then you had 31 and 48, I think, which were 2 UHF stations that had junk on it. Okay, so the TV started flourishing. People started buying television sets. They were in black and white. You had them from, 12 inches to maybe 19 inches. They weren't very big. They eventually, by the 1960, they got up to about 21 inches. And by the late 60s, they were up at 23 to 25 inches. And then later on, they got to 27 inches. But mostly the biggest, the old style with the curved tube, the picture tube TVs, the biggest they generally got to was 23 to 25 inches. They made just plain Jane box models, and they had portables that were about this thick, and they had mostly a 17 or a 19-inch screen or a 15-inch screen, and they had a cart you could wheel it around in, and it had a handle on the top, and it was pretty much similar technology. The consoles probably played better, and they had a console, they had a box, and that was just, like that, and then they had a console, which was a long thing, maybe 6 feet long, and some of them had a bar in there, some had a record player in there, with a space to store records, and storage in there, and speakers, and they weren't doing stereo, so it was just one speaker. And people started watching TV, but there was not that much to watch. And it was in black and white, and it wasn't very engrossing. It didn't really pull you in that much. So in the evenings, after work and they had dinner, the TV started to kick in with the quality shows at that time. In the morning and during the day and the afternoon, they had junk on, real old. When I was a kid, I used to come home from, in the summer day camp, and I used to put the TV on. It would be about 5 o'clock, eat dinner in front of the TV, and I'd wind up watching silent movies sometimes. They were still showing silence. And you had to know how to read to watch silent movies because they put screens up with words on them, and a lot of people couldn't read, so it didn't work for them. But I had no trouble. I was a good reader at an early age. And then kids' shows were on, and old movies were on, real old movies like Flash Gordon from the 30s and the 40s. I mean, the special effects were what today a junior high school kid would come up with. They were terrible. So, after 6 o'clock, you had news, and then about 7 o'clock, you started getting your prime time. 8 o'clock to 9 o'clock, 9 to 10, and 10 to 11 was your prime time. 8 to 9 and 9 to 10 mostly. The 7 to 8 and the 10 to 11 were lesser prime time. A lot of people went to bed at 10 o'clock. That was it for them. They got up at 6 or something and they wanted to sleep. They did have, okay, so the people had to, this might be hard for you to understand, they had to be in front of the screen at a certain hour on a certain day to see the show. There was no streaming. There was nothing on DVD. There was no machine to record it. It was on once. And then if you missed it and you wanted to watch it, you had to watch it in the summer. Because they played the reruns from the summer was June and July, basically. Okay, the latter half of June, July, and August until Labor Day. It was about 10 weeks. That was your summer season, and that's when they played the reruns. And they used to work harder back then. Having a TV show was very hard work. They were working 6, 7 days a week. It was very difficult because there was so many shots and takes and scenes, and you know they had sound stages where they'd have the living room, they'd have the kitchen, they maybe had the backyard with a fence, and stuff like that. But it was still difficult changing all this around and wardrobe and costume. And it was very time consuming. Maybe a lot of the time they spent sitting in a trailer or something like that, but they had a lot of things going on. It was slow moving, so they would shoot episodes which were very popular for serials. They would shoot as many as 39 in a season, but normally it would be in the high 20s. Sometimes it would hit 40, 39, 38, So they had about 12 weeks off. They got a week off for Thanksgiving, and they did Thanksgiving specials, and they did usually 2 weeks they shut for Christmas. Why did they shut these things off then? Well, to give the workers a rest, that was secondary. Why did they do it? Because people would be doing other things on Christmas. They would go skiing, they would go to the beach, depending where they lived. They would go visit grandma and grandpa or relatives, or take a vacation, or go fishing at the cabin, or whatever. They had schools out, they had 4-day weekends from school and from work, and they wouldn't be home watching that much TV. They had better things to do. People were not living a virtual life back then. They were in the real world. Okay, TV was a brief interruption from the real world. I remember in the 63, 64, maybe, probably 64, even 65, Batman, the TV series, came on. It only ran 2 or 3 seasons, I think 3. One of the kids in the neighborhood was related to Adam West, and Adam West would come visit them. And so we called the kid Batman. He was a really nice kid. And they came with the show, and it was really exciting. They had the comic. I never saw a comic book show. Well, we did have Superman and stuff, but this was exciting. So they had, the villains, and when Batman would punch somebody, they'd put a sign on the screen, pow, wham, bang, and it was, I liked it. So I would be interacting with friends. I remember when it came on, I was in the night center across the street, which was a public school, and you paid about $3 or $6 a year. And in the evening, to keep the kids off the street, they would set up the night center, which had ping pong, billiards, bumper pool, a room with dancing and records, a weightlifting room and basketball court, and just to hang out. And they hired teachers, and the teachers were on the lookout for gangs and drugs, very sharp. They wouldn't allow it. These were guys that fought in World War II, and they didn't take any crap from the gang kids. They were spent years in life and death situations, and one of them told me once, he was in Europe. He used to wake up in the morning in the battlefield, and all the bodies would be laying out there, and he'd be eating breakfast. You're not going to take a guy like this and intimidate him because you're a member of a gang. A guy like that is, he's a big tough guy. Take you and throw you down the steps. And if they call the cops are going to 95% take the side of the school. I mean, unless you had evidence to the contrary, the school is always right, especially if it happens in school property. So I would leave the night center, go up there, watch Batman, which was a half hour or an hour, and then I would go back to the night center. I didn't stay there watching the TV. It wasn't that enthralling for me. Then they came up with Man from U.N.C.L.E., and I thought that was a great show. So it was, I forget, Robert somebody and a Russian guy. So and the guy that played Topper, the Friendly Ghost, he was in J. Leo J. Carroll, I think, something like that, Carol Nash, I don't know, something, Leo J. Carroll maybe. So, I would go and watch that, and then go back and hang out with the kids. We didn't live a virtual life. We played board games. We played cards. We read books. We had electric trains. The girls had dolls and doll carriages and doll houses. And then, we didn't have this, okay? So the family would sit down together and watch these TV shows as a family activity. And it wasn't a major part in the show, okay, of the evening. I mean, some of the people would only watch a show for an hour, a half hour, or 2 hours. It wasn't a major thing in their life, okay? Now, it started out very clean and innocent, and they had Jack Burns and Gracie Allen had a show that was very popular back in '53, and there were no sex scenes, there were no makeout scenes, kissing and stuff. There was no two-piece bikinis or promiscuous clothing or anything like that. Did they have alcoholic drinking and drunk and drugs and violence and murder and rape and adult? No, 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 none of that. They had smoking, but America smoked. I mean, at least half the United States smoked in the '50s, so that was no surprise. And but what they did do was they had a godless lifestyle they were portraying. God was not in anything on TV, nothing. And they weren't showing witchcraft or anything like that. And they started with the advertisers, and they were starting to sell the people crap they didn't need, like pet evaporated milk. What do they need evaporated milk for? There's no practical purpose for it. It's a way to put milk in a can with a long shelf life, probably 5 or 10 years. And they were teaching the people they could bake with it and do this with that. Now, what do you need it for? You don't. So they were getting the people to buy things by gaslighting them, psychologically playing with them and making them think they needed this or it would benefit them to have it. Almost the same thing, but not quite. They were selling Breck shampoo. They were selling cigarettes. They were selling cars. That was a big thing. Dodge was sponsoring Groucho Marx guest game show, or it was a quiz show really, for years, and then he picked up pet evaporated milk. And back then, a big company would sponsor a whole TV show, so they were the only advertiser on the show. That was the status for them, and they promoted products. And sadly, a lot of these products were things people didn't need that they made them think they needed, like a certain shampoo or a certain kind of milk or a certain kind of baby formula or hair dye or laundry soap. They made millions and millions of dollars doing this. They started learning how to manipulate the people, so it was bad that way. Now, what's the next progression? So people were still resistant to it. They were living in the real world. Mothers were staying home. They weren't working. The economy was easy steezy, okay? Anybody could buy a house. In '53, in America, there was a lot of houses in much of America that were probably $2,500. You had a job, you weren't a deadbeat, you got a house. Okay, interest rates were 2%, 3%. You got yourself a house. What'd you get? You got yourself what they call the blue collar house. 3 bedroom, 2 bath, 1,800 square feet, 2 car garage, patio in the back. And it was your house. Then you could do add-ons. You wanted a pool. It was probably an extra $3,000, or well, no, back then probably 1,500 or 1,000. Nobody really had pools that often. Rich people did. So that was your basic house. The master bedroom had a full bath, and then you had a full bath that the other 2 bedrooms shared, and you put the kids in the other bedrooms, and you'd have bunk beds. You could put 4 kids in there or 3 kids or whatever, and then you had mom and dad had the big bedroom. You had a kitchen, you had a dining room, you had an area in the kitchen you could eat out also, and sometimes you had a den and you had a living room, and basically you had an attic, and some places had a basement, and that was your house. That was your whole house. You had a little front yard, a backyard. Maybe you were on a fourth or a third of an acre or something like that, and that was your house. They were tract houses. You moved into the communities. You made friends with your neighbors. See, most of America was homogenous. Everybody was the same. There was no open immigration. The Puerto Rican people were discriminated against heavily, as were the people of color, the black people and others that were of color got discriminated against badly. Chinese people, Japanese people. They suffered. They did not have it good. They were picked on. They couldn't get credit. They couldn't get good jobs and this and that. And it wasn't until sometime in the latter 60s that they were able to start getting into colleges, get an education, and get out in the job market and get, some fair treatment. It took a long time. So, mom was home when the kids got home from school. Here's your peanut butter and jelly. Here's your milk and cookies. Change your clothes, because when we went to grade school, we had to wear shoes, leather shoes, long pants, shirt with a collar, and a tie. And you couldn't wear a hat. So we had to change when we got home, and then we go out and play or do homework, depending on the season. In the winter, in New York, it's so cold, you're not going out to play. So, but then when the weather was bad, we go to each other's houses and we played board games, cards, different kinds of things. We interacted. And then when the weather was good, what did we do? We played stickball, baseball, basketball, softball, other games we invented with pink balls or handball, off the stoop, stuff like that. Ringo-Levio, hide and go seek, and we interacted with each other. We were not in a virtual world. Yes, we came and watched some TV shows, but you had to be in front of the TV at a certain time on a certain day to watch your shows, or you could worry about it that summer. Okay? All right. And life was good. There was not a lot of drug problems. There wasn't a lot. People were drinking. I guess there was some alcohol problems. I don't know. There wasn't a bad crime rate. There wasn't a bad drug rate. They didn't have people that wanted to overthrow the government. And they had a very small welfare class. And that's what went on in America. And in my recollection, people were much happier. They were in a real world. People would do gardening. A lot of older people retired were gardening. They joined gardening clubs, and they liked gardening. Other people like going bowling, for instance. A lot of people like playing golf. They were in the real world. They weren't in the virtual world. As time moved on, you get into the latter 50s, the TV sets got bigger. There were more TV shows, more advertisers. We used to hate it with the ads. They used to jack the volume up during the ad, noticeably, like 30-40%. It would blast to wake you up. So if you were dozing off in front of the TV, they'd jack the volume up to wake you up. They did. Eventually they had to stop doing that. And you had sometimes 2-3 minutes of commercials, really. So people would get up and they would go to the kitchen and get something to eat during the commercial and then come back. So people started getting fat. They stopped becoming active. They got a good easy chair or 2 easy chairs or a sofa. They'd come home from work. Mom would have dinner. They'd eat dinner. They'd talk to the kids. They would change into comfortable clothes and they would plop down in front of the TV. And they'd stay there for a few hours, and they would eat. What else are you going to do? Or drink and smoke. Then the TV got more interesting. And then they started promoting different types of shows. They were manipulating behavior now. In the latter 50s, starting in, let's say, 56, there was tons of, not World War II movies. They didn't do much of that, really. A little it went on. They had Victory at Sea, about the Navy battles, but there wasn't much about World War II, surprisingly. They wanted that gone away. So they had Westerns. All of a sudden, Westerns were all over the place. Bonanza, Have Gun Will Travel, Wanted Dead or Alive, Gunsmoke, and many others. Weekly shows. And What did they promote on the TV show? Well, it was completely false. And the guys that I ran into in the gun world when I was into guns were very into the Old West. And there was only really one recorded gunfight where two guys squared off in the street and drew down. Wyatt Earp was one of the guys and killed the other guy. They have one recorded incident in that. It never happened other than that. Maybe there was another one or two, but I mean, it was such a rare thing. They were bushwhacking each other over card games. Roadmen were bushwhacking or ambushing people out in the hold on a second, I'm trying to get out of this thing. They were bushwhacking people out in the what am I doing here? I'm gonna get out of this. They were bushwhacking people out in the backcountry. Did they have people robbing banks and stuff? Yes. Did they have people robbing stores? Probably not a lot. Was gambling a really big thing? Yes. Did they have saloons with gambling in them? Yes. Hold on a minute, I gotta do some work here in the chat real quick. Real quick. But when you watch the Westerns, what they showed you is every week they had, you know, these guys were Marshall Dillon, what was he, the Marshal, and then you had Wanted Dead or Alive. He was Steve McQueen, the bounty hunter. He had a sawed-off rifle. Then you had the Rifleman. And he was a rancher that was a great gunfighter that just happened to kill somebody every show. So these shows, somebody was getting killed every half hour, every hour segment. So they were promoting murder, right? Is murder a sin? It's a bad sin. It's a sin. Just like adultery is a sin. Were they doing adultery back then? Not really, but they had these saloon girls where they wouldn't get too graphic. They just wanted you to think that pretty girls in dresses hung around in these bars to get guys to buy them drinks. They didn't jump the gap that there were rooms upstairs and for a price they could take the woman upstairs and she was a prostitute, which is the reality of the thing. And they didn't do that. And then they had promiscuous dancing shows for the guys to get them fired up for the prostitutes, I guess. And they had, you know, a lot of drinking and gambling, but they want you to think that that's all the people were doing, which is ridiculous. It's stupid. These people were hardworking people. They weren't just running around whoremongering and getting drunk and stuff like that. That's stupid to portray that, but that's how they were painting the picture to the people. Now, the people that lived in the West and grandma and grandpa and great-grandma and grandpa went through this and lived through it, and they would know it was a line of garbage in it. It wasn't true. They knew it, but not many people did know it, okay? It wasn't common knowledge. So the TV progressed, and then what did we start to see? We started to see lots of shows. They had comedy shows, family variety shows like Ed Sullivan. A typical Ed Sullivan show in the could be Elvis Presley was on, Frank Sinatra was on, somebody that had a trained seal act was on, or a chimpanzee that rode a bicycle or ice skated. They had singers on. They had, you know, anything. Acrobats. comedians, double talkers, and crazy thing. You wouldn't know what he would have on. You'd get on the TV and say, "We have a really big show tonight." He was making himself out to be like he was a entertainment figure, where he was really the brains or the producer, you would say, of the show. But he did go out there and introduce themselves. I guess he wanted to be on both sides of the camera in Hollywood, and he was able to do it. So the shows, were introducing, Ed Sullivan really wasn't, but most of the shows were introducing bad things: gambling, alcohol use, fighting in the bars, murdering people, and they were promoting the good guys in the Western. They promoted the Lone Ranger and stuff like that. Yancey Derringer, he had a Derringer in his hat. He had a Derringer in his cane. I know his cane was a sword, or he had a gun in it, or something. I don't know. It was weird. And then the Westerns stayed, and then they started with cop shows. So they would start out showing you somebody commits a murder, somebody commits a bank robbery, a robbery of a house, or a business, or counterfeit money, or car stealing, or, something, kidnapping. So they were promoting sin and crime that way, and then the police would, of course, fix it. So the sins were rolling in there. Now, come the late 50s into the 60s, and we got color TV. TVs are getting better and bigger, and now they're in color. Now they started getting more engrossing, and people were getting more glued to the screen. And they started spending more time in this virtual world watching color TV. The ball games were very beautiful in color. You had the green field, all the different colors on the uniforms and the caps, and it was much more dynamic than a black and white viewing of a ball game, baseball. So now they had adults on Saturday and Sunday. They'd get up and they'd watch baseball, they'd watch hockey, or depending what season, or football and basketball and bowling and billiards and car races, horse races. I mean, they'd just be sitting there watching sports. Then at night they would switch to the family shows. So people were starting to live in the virtual world. They stopped trying to worry about, they just didn't get too excited about hanging out with their friends anymore. They wanted to be in front of the boob tube. That's what we used to call it, the boob tube. Boob means you're a dummy. And it started getting there. Okay? Now, still the biggest TV you get your hands on was probably a 25-inch with rare exceptions. So it wasn't as engrossing. Okay. Now, there was a lot of active TV on during the day, and on the weekends they had a lot of kids shows. They had cartoons. Kids in the morning on the way to school could watch cartoons. And they're still doing the cop shows, showing you people with a lifestyle of crime. Cops that are criminals with a badge in some cases, or phony baloney goody two-shoes cops. Westerns with prostitution, alcohol, gambling. I mean, it was just lying all over the place. They were giving you lies, okay? And now the cop shows were getting big. Okay. So now we come into the mid-60s, and there's more and more stuff on. TV's getting more and more promiscuous, more and more sexual. And by the late 60s, you started seeing some type of immature cable in some countries, but it went like that, and the TVs eventually went to 27 inches, and then by the time you get into the 70s, let's say the late 70s or the mid 70s, you have first screen movies playing at home on cable. You'd have to pay per movie, but you could watch the same movies in the theater. So they started encouraging people to finish Life at Home in their spare time. Yeah. So now we got better color, and now we got cable where initially you're able to watch the same shows you could get with an antenna, but you'd get all of them. Maybe there'd be, 15 in your area or something like that. And you could get all of them, and the reception would be perfect. You wouldn't have the antenna problem. So now, still, people aren't getting very interested. People are still going out Friday and Saturday. They're still going on vacations. They're going out of town. So early days, they killed, sometime in June, they killed the TV shows because school was out and the kids and the parents would take vacations together. There was no TV watching. So that was their time off. So once you had the beginning of cable, then you got the progression into better cable, and now they came out with pornography. So they're using the television for pornography. And this was pretty weird. Now, they had, now they started selling in the late 70s, I guess, cassettes with movies and old TV shows on there. And you had to get a special player for them. It would play it through the TV set. Then they had laser discs, and then that didn't work, and they had, didn't work out anyway. You had the laser disc, and then you had the DVD. So people were watching the movies in the movie theater still, which was still sort of a family activity, but not much. It's family going into virtual reality, not the real world, And and then it keeps progressing, and now you get big screen TVs. I know in the 80s I had a 40-inch Panasonic with the speakers around there, surround speakers, not surround, stereo. It was fantastic. Top Gun was the big movie, the original one, and you'd see him on a 40-inch screen, and you'd hear him flying across the screen from right to left. It was amazing at the time. And it wasn't, some years after that, not that many, I had a 60-inch TV in the house with surround sound with speakers in the ceiling. Behind me on the left and the right, I had a big boom, for the treble, or whatever, the bass. The bass was behind the TV set. It would shake the house, and sit there watching movies, and I get all the sound effects. It's like, wow, I'm really in the virtual thing, right? I didn't understand how bad this was, right? And I used to go to the stores and rent the discs. Friday, usually they came out on, I don't know, Tuesday or Friday, whatever it was. I'd go in the afternoon before people got off work, and I'd get the discs and keep them a couple of days and watch what came out, the new movies on the discs, and I was having a good time with it, right? And then there was the internet, and the internet got big in the late 90s, and they started promoting the worst, most vile form of pornography, all of it, and gambling. And then they had games where people were getting immersed into sicko games. So they were getting people away from life into that. In the meantime, they were controlling the news, from the newspapers, the magazines, and all the TV shows. They were telling the people what to believe with the news shows. the people didn't have it together. They didn't know what was going on. They weren't sharing information. Then comes the internet. Now, they didn't know what to do with the internet when it first came out. They didn't know how to control it. They knew how to promote gambling, how to promote pornography, and how to promote games. And the big, I'm going to be back in a second, the big portals like AOL were really news media outlets. People would log into AOL and they would see the news that AOL wants them to see. That's what AOL was showing them. And it was working out for AOL. And other outlets were doing a similar thing. I'll be right back. Hi, Chiefy. Hi, kiddo. So, back in the late 90s, no, the mid 90s, I started spreading the gospel as best I could back then. It was, figure, almost 30 years ago. I didn't know as much as I know now. I didn't get saved till 1982. So I had, maybe 13 years under my belt, which you could think is a lot when you're in the gospel 10 or 15 years. You think it's a lot, but when you're in it, 40 years, it's not a lot. But I did teach. I had a website. It got hundreds of thousands of views, if I remember correctly. It got reprinted and distributed, I think, on every continent. It basically taught the church wasn't the church. And I did teach spiritual warfare because I came back from Israel by then, and I knew what I was doing to some extent with spiritual warfare. Not as much as I do now, but I knew a bunch, And I had other teachings too, but the big one is why the church isn't the church. Oh, I taught end times as well as I could back then. I didn't know too much about the glory of God of Israel. I didn't know much about the two witnesses. I didn't know a whole lot about a whole lot of things, but I passed on what I could. And I'm sure I had mistakes and stuff, but it was up for a number of years. Like, what's a number of years? Probably till about 2000, 2001. Probably till about 2000. So it was up about 5 years. And it did pretty good. It helped a lot of people. Back then we used to say we're called out from the church. That's what the phraseology was. Pretty accurate too. That was their first loss of control. Another loss of control was the auction sites, particularly eBay. eBay was a whole other world than it is today. Okay, um, eBay was the auction sites were hot. eBay was, and people were running auctions. They weren't doing buy it now. I don't even know if they ever had buy it now. They were doing. I was on there early. How early? Let's see. Can't remember. Before 2000, I know that. Probably around 97, 96, 97. I was on something like that. And the people were making a living on eBay, regular people, and eBay was eating it up. They were based in Oakland, California. I think a woman was running it. She was giving her good sellers, health insurance plans. They had to buy it, and they were good plans. You had to pay for it, but there was so many sellers buying it. She was holding conferences for them, and there were a lot of people making back then. $50, $100, $200,000 a year. People were specializing. They were going to garage sales on the weekends, buying all sorts of stuff, and then during the week cleaning them up, photographing them, and uploading them onto eBay for auction. And they were doing very well. Lots of people were doing very well. They were supporting their family. Women were supporting children. And they were doing well. They weren't just getting by. They were able to buy a new car and take a vacation. They were doing good. Then eBay got more involved with PayPal. And that was the mistake. Now they just separated themselves from PayPal. PayPal is not a nice operation, if you know anything about them. So, so many people were doing well on eBay that it got to the point where you only could use PayPal to pay. You could use your credit cards through PayPal. What it used to be is you could pay by telling the people you're going to send them a check, you're going to send them a money order, a bank transfer, a Western Union, or a credit card. And people had their own credit card processors that had nothing to do with eBay or PayPal, and you would process the credit card through them. So it was the Wild West, anything goes with payment. So then with the PayPal thing, they started clamping it down. No, you can't do Western Union, too much fraud. No, you can't do this, you can't do that. And then finally everything had to go through PayPal. And what PayPal did is anybody that processed more than about $25,000 in a year, they got rid of them. And now you couldn't function on eBay. You couldn't use PayPal, and they would confiscate money from people. I think that I used to think, I do not know if this is true, that the only way they made money was by confiscating people's money. A terrible operation. It's a shame that they were able to operate the way they did without going to jail, in my opinion, all those years. It's just ridiculous. So you had all kinds of problems with them. So they got rid of everybody, and they ended this make money on eBay thing. They didn't want regular people, believers, non-espots, making a good living on the internet. They didn't want it anymore. So they attacked eBay, which was the biggest source of it, and people could make a good living at eBay, just doing garage sales. Or people used to go to, let's say there's a TV show in LA. I don't know, it's Betty and the Fishes, any stupid TV show. It runs 5 seasons, right? At the end of the 5th season, they got shipping containers full of items that they don't need anymore. Wardrobe, props, furniture. and they sell this stuff. They try to get their money back out of it, okay? So with clothing items, they don't usually, want to sell, a sweater or a dress by itself. They don't bring that much money in, it's too much trouble. So they sell the whole container. They'll auction it, usually not on eBay. You go over there and you look through it and you give them an offer, I guess, I don't know. Or they tell you what they want for it. So there are people that would buy the whole container, and then they would take it to their warehouse facility, and they would photograph and label it. So they would say, purse from this person on this TV show, used and seen so and so and so and so. Because usually the tags that came with the clothes from the studio had, the name of the character and the scenes and stuff like that. So they would, and people were buying these things. They might still do it, I don't know. Sometimes the clothes were run-of-the-mill Walmart junk that was used on the TV show, and sometimes it was very expensive clothing that was used, and they'd sell it, and they got good money for it. And so people would buy that and make a lot of money. See, there was all kinds of ways to make money. They were selling, they would go to stores that were doing closeout, like Neiman Marcus in a ghetto city would sell clothes real cheap, and they would go to these cities and buy the stuff and then sell it for double and triple what they paid for it. Because other people didn't know this was going on. There was a watch business. They were selling watches on eBay like crazy, jewelry, clothing, a little bit of furniture, not too big because of the size. People started buying and selling cars on eBay. So too many people who were non-Satan bots started making a good living on eBay, so they shut it down using PayPal. They didn't want it anymore, just for the sake, they didn't want any non-S-bots making a living, period. That's all it is. So that came down. There used to be other auction sites along with eBay, but eBay bought a lot of them out. And they had some big money behind them, S-bot money, and they became the dominant factor. Today, eBay runs a fairly respectable operation, I have to say. You don't need to use PayPal to operate on eBay. They take credit cards. They don't have any broad other types of payments because they're worried about fraud. But it used to be you could say, okay, I'm going to pay by check or money order, and they'd give you 10 days or 2 weeks or whatever to pay for it. So when you won the auction, you go drop a check in the mail, and then they get the check, and when the check clears, they would send you the goods. That's how a lot of it went down, If you wanted it faster, you did a Western Union. But then you had to go to Western Union and pick it up. And I remember when I was active on eBay and I was doing other business on the internet using Western Union, I'd go there and I'd have 3 or 4 wires to pick up in the evening. And I'd go there and I'd be having a lot of money, so I'd pack a gun, and go over there and pick it up and then go home in the evening. And I'd be very careful. There's people hanging around the supermarkets. If they see something like this, they'll try to take you out in the parking lot. So you got to go out of there very cautiously. So to me, that meant hand on the gun, one hand on the gun, one hand on the car keys, and I'd briskly walk to the car, but not that briskly, mostly looking around me and my back and my front and my sides. And if anybody came up on me, I was going to draw, I'd have the gun at least pointed down and holding it, ready to just pick it up and shoot. I wasn't going to take any. Some of these idiots could shoot first or crack you in the head with a pipe or something. What do you want that for? Some idiot hits you in the head with a pipe, you might not be right the rest of your life, So, but I think eBay today turned into a respectable operation. They used to take e-gold, which was the real gold-backed virtual currency back then. eBay used to take e-gold for auctions. You could look up what auctions take e-gold. Could you imagine eBay taking Bitcoin? What kind of a booming business that would be, and how the government would hate it? Oh, it would give people that have funds they're not paying taxes on an outlet to go shopping. It'd be amazing. So if eBay allowed that, they'd probably do $50 million a day in virtual currency, Bitcoin and the like. You know. So they do boats on eBay, they do cars, jewelry, they really gold bullion on eBay, everything. So okay, so the the TV was used to introduce sin to the people, give them a non-godly lifestyle, and lots and lots of sin, and lots of lies, and then it got worse and worse, and it culminates with the internet. So today, people are not living in the real world; they're living on the internet, in social media, the Facebooks and those kind of things, right? And they're watching TV and movies and there's social media and email and chatting, and they don't have a real life anymore. And the children are all screwed up. They're not only are they doing all this, they're watching bizarro porn at an age of 9 years old, 10, 12. That shouldn't be. They're gambling. It's terrible, you know. So I think when we get to redemption here in Israel, that we're not going to have the internet, because when the wars at Jeremiah 30:11 start, like you're seeing them building up in the Pacific, you got China and North Korea versus South Korea, Japan, Taiwan, Guam, Philippines, Australia, etc., and then NATO versus Russia in Europe, and that's going to, they're going to explode. These wars are going to start, and there's such a multitude of modern weapons. They're going to start destroying the internet connectivity, the cable, and everything, and they're not going to want it being used to convey and transfer information. I don't even know if France is still having bad protests like there were a week or 10 days ago. I know Macron did something to the internet, and we don't know. I don't know what's going on. I'm not picking up anything. So there's going to be countries that want this stuff out of functioning mode. Because they don't want it conveying information. They don't want getting out or being used by revolutionaries if they have any and stuff like that. So it's generally going to go out. They're going to want to cut the cables, and they're going to want to blow it up, and it's going to go out, and it's not going to be there. And of course, the television networks and the cable and all that are going to fall apart too. So I don't think we're going to, when we're redeemed, we're ever going to build this stuff back up. It's not worth it. It's not. We're going to return to family life with large families, many children, be fruitful and multiply. And we'll have businesses that we own, we'll have agriculture, we'll have families to interact with, friends, neighbors, and we're not going to have this nonsense of the virtual world with the sick games where they actually feel like they're participating in criminality, and it's to some of these kids, the games are real life to them. It's not real life. It can't be. So I think we should just let this stuff go and not miss it. There's nothing to miss. Just it'll fall apart, and then let it fall apart. That's my feeling. It's not good. We pervert it, use it to spread the true gospel, amen, right? And try to spread true news around and stuff like that. But overwhelmingly, it's perverted. So On the news front, Ukraine sent drones into Russia yesterday or the day before. They went into Moscow, they hit the FSB and an apartment building across the street or a block away, a big, like a 30-story, looked rather prestigious apartment building. FSB is the Russian FBI. And they got hit, I believe, and the apartment building got hit. There was a number of drones. Some got knocked down, some didn't. Putin had his Panther S-2 rockets on the roofs of the buildings over there. They deployed but didn't knock the drones down, so they're not any good. And there was damage to the building. I think this apartment house is probably where the FSB agents live, so they could walk to work in the freezing cold weather of Moscow. And I think Ukraine knew that. And Ukraine's going to keep attacking them inside Russia, which has got to be making the Russian population scared as all get up. I mean, their famous monumental buildings are getting hit by drones from Ukraine. Ukraine has every right to do that because Russia's hitting civilian targets in Ukraine. So I'm not going to say that Ukraine shouldn't do that. But it's got to kill the morale in Russia, and it has to show the people that listening to Putin is pretty stupid. He can't protect them. And that's getting them nervous, or it should. So that's new and exciting. Some of the Netanyahu people in his camp, the Likud party, are saying they don't want to move forward with any more judicial reform. They're nervous, they're scared, they don't want a bad revolution, they're not happy. Netanyahu has, or probably his advisors, has concocted another way to keep him out of jail without causing a major blowback. So the way that would work is they take the Attorney General position, not so much the person, the position, and they divided it into two positions, one for the Attorney General and one as a prosecutor's office. And the Knesset, of course, will get to appoint the prosecutor, so it'll be a slob after Netanyahu's own heart and own pistol. So that gets Netanyahu out of jail, and his cases get dismissed, and we don't necessarily have a big civil war. And people may not get that livid over this, I don't know. And that's the end of the judicial reform. This reasonableness clause enables Aryeh Deri to get back into the position as the health minister and the Minister of Mishrat HaPanim, Minister of the Interior, controlling immigration. He gets in, Shas party's happy. They changed the AG position to create a puppet that can dismiss his cases, and that's it. Can he pull this off? I don't know. I don't think so. They asked him what he would do if the Supreme Court says the reasonableness thing you passed is illegal or not reasonable and we're going to take it off the books. He said he would comply with them. But the proof's in the pudding. Let's see what he really does. We still got normal terrorism in Israel almost every day. Our economy is not doing good. There's public criticism about Netanyahu not giving a hoot about our economy being in bad shape. Let's see what the shekel and the dollar are doing today. Gold is up there. It's almost $2,000 an ounce. Spot gold. No, xe.com. We're going to do the shekel and the dollar. The dollar is a big job to do because you got to do it against 25 countries. I'm not going to do that. I'll run it against maybe 4 countries. That's it. Okay, let's take a look. The dollar against the euro. Let's see this. $1.10. So the dollar is climbing slightly again against the euro. The British pound, the dollar against the pound is $1.28. The pound is quite high against the dollar. Let's try it against the shekel. The dollar buys 370. That's the way it's been for a few days. It's been 372 and then kind of trivial bouncing around. Canadian is at 75 cents, which is pretty okay. That's about it. So, not that much. The economies of China and other countries are terrible. Turkey's bad. Russia's economy is bad. China's economy is appallingly bad. And they're all hoping to do well with BRICS. There's 50 countries that want to join BRICS next month. Maybe they'll take 35, maybe they'll take 50, maybe they'll take 20. I don't know how many they're going to take, but to make this work with a gold-backed trading currency, they have to have the countries put their gold in the BRICS Bank or in China or Russia. The 2 most powerful countries are China and Russia, and I don't think very many people are going to put their gold in those countries because NATO-Russia war looming on the horizon and America and her allies against China looming on the horizon. So I do not think they're going to do much if they have to put their gold in China or Russia. If they don't put it in there, then you're going to have unverified game playing, and the system will bog down and fail. So we'll have to see what happens. I think it's going to be a mess, and then they're going to be shut out economically. All right, so once again, please pray for my wife Rivka, who's got a sinus infection with a little nose bleeding. Pray for healing, and pray I don't get it. And pray for our animals and pets. They be happy, healthy, and whole, and not run away. And thank you for the offerings, and pray for our finances and peace and joy, and pray for the peace of Jerusalem. And I'll keep you updated as to things go on. But it looks like this judicial reform may be coming to a close that doesn't wreck Israel any further. But then we're still going to be stuck with Netanyahu. There's an article in the Haaretz that I put up on Telegram comparing Netanyahu to Nero. Nero became a whack job at the end of the Roman Empire, and he was out playing a musical instrument on the roofs while Rome was burning. So Netanyahu is there, who they're comparing him to. So it's a sad day when the people wake up to such an extent about this mental case. So there you have it. And I send my Shabbat Shalom to all those who love Yeshua HaMashiach, and I'm out. Thanks, guys.